All right, let's jump in here. Okay. All right, let's settle in. Okay, so let's talk. How about if someone doesn't partake in any social controls? Okay, that was a question directed at Hershey's social controls from last class. This doesn't happen, right? Everybody has some kind of social relationships. You know, even monks living in the desert were connected to other people somehow, so that doesn't tend to happen. Okay, our next midterm is on Friday. I know it looks like there's a mistake in the syllabus, but the dates for the midterm are exactly where they need to be. So it is next Friday, which I believe is the 8th. Yes, that's 7 days from now, the 8th. So that is when it is. Okay. Join my quiz. So I promised you some quiz questions. I was finishing them up beforehand, before the class. Join up really quickly here. Because I have 4 quiz questions for you. Oh, as people join in, these are for our nervous strain theory. So I'll wait maybe like 10, 15 more seconds, 30 seconds. And then I will jump in. I'm testing out a new Slido thing too, in terms of quiz questions, so it should be fun. Okay, hopefully you don't have to join it every single time. All right, 35. It's only 4 questions, so I've never used this before. I'm doing this live with no testing, so bear with me. All right. So, Raj is from a poor home and dreams of becoming a doctor. He wins a full scholarship and graduates at the top of his university class. In strain theory terms, what is he? Is he a ritualist, a conformist, a retreatist, or an innovator? I know this doesn't have music or cool graphics like Kahoot, but it's also built into my PowerPoint, so I feel like it works well. Okay. Almost there. Answer. I might not wait for all 63 people. Okay. Okay, and the correct answer, and the one that 84% of people did choose, was a conformist. Okay, so why is it a conformist? Right, Raj is, even though he's from a poor home, he has this dream, right? These cultural goal of doing an important job, having a good salary. So what does he do? He goes about it in the normal way, right? He gets top grades in school. He becomes a doctor. That's what he does, right? He goes the normal path. Ta-da! All right, next one. Willie. Willie is from a poor home and dreams of becoming a doctor, just like Raj. His grades are not good enough to gain entrance to university, so he gives up on his dream and works a series of menial jobs for the rest of his life. In strain theory terms, what is Willie? Is he a ritualist, a conformist, a retreatist, or a rebel? Dun, 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 dun. Okay, a couple more seconds. I should have put a timer on these. I think there is a timer possibility, but I'm still learning how this works. All right, last few seconds here. Okay. So, 58% of you said ritualist, 2% said a conformist, 4% said a retreatist, and 2% said a rebel. All right. So, ritualist, so more than half of you got it correct. Good job. Why is it a ritualist here? Well, because he's still sort of participating in society, right? He still has a job. He's just given up on that cultural goal, right? The prominence of being a doctor in this case, the important job, that thing. And he goes and he has menial jobs, right? He's working, but he's still participating, but he's not not living towards that cultural goal. All right. Oops, those got stuck there. Rebecca is from a poor home and dreams of becoming a doctor. They all dream of becoming a doctor. She has excellent grades, but not the money required for 8 years or more of university. She works part-time at a restaurant, but decides to supplement her income by selling drugs to her coworkers as well. In strain theory terms, what is Rebecca? Is she a ritualist, a conformist, an innovator, or a retreatist? What do you think? There's a little more uncertainty on this one. People are taking a little more time to answer. Or maybe the YouTube stream is a couple seconds behind. Who knows? Okay. All right, close enough. All right, 93% of you said that Rebecca is an innovator, and 93% of you are right. She still wants money, right? She still wants that cultural goal, but she's just going about it in an unconventional way. Oh, I thought I had one more question. Oh, I had one more question, but I thought I had one more. Maybe I forgot to hit add. Okay. Many of you did well. Okay, sorry, I had one more question. I'll throw it in another time. I didn't mean to exit. I just forgot to hit add. I forgot to hit add. Okay, no worries. We'll move on from here. All right, let's check if there's any questions for understanding, and then we'll move on. I feel pretty good about that, seeing that. Okay, which chapters are on midterm 2? Not quite there yet. I'll tell you on Monday. Okay, if I don't speed because I don't want a ticket, even though there is no police, I can see, would that be considered internal? That would be internal social control. Midterm is non-cumulative. Okay. I gotta forward through this again. Okay. Yay, Lauren. Okay, so last time we ended off me canceling the Slido on the board. You guys can yell at me if that happens. Tell me. Okay, now I'm gonna put it back. I forgot every time I hit escape, everything disappears. Okay, so we were talking last time about the medicalization of deviance, right? How it used to be you were a rambunctious boy and you needed to be, taught proper morality and how to behave properly, and now you're given Ritalin or Vyvanse or some other ADHD drug, right? Because we've medicalized that deviance. It's no longer a moral fault; it's now a medical problem. And just to illustrate it, and again, Foucault talks about this in his Madness and Civilization and the Birth of the Clinic. In the mid-19th century, idiocy, insanity was the only recognized mental disorder. The DSM-5 from 2013 says the most recent issue or edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychological Association lists now 294 mental disorders, right? So as we've thought about it this way, we've cataloged more and more, mental disorders. And so you see things like more people taking antidepressants, more people taking ADHD medication, all sorts of things like this. It's pretty rampant all over the place. Okay, and yeah, North Americans now more stressed than ever before in lots of ways, and more cut off from traditional institutions that helped them deal with stress in the past. Okay, so and the cultural context plays a role in the number and scope of medical or mental disorders. The more mental disorders you think you have, and the more people around you have, the more likely you are to identify yourself as having one as well. Okay, we talk about deviance, right? We talk about prisons. That's where a lot of people who are criminal deviants end up, right? We talked about this when we talked about socialization, right? Prisons are agents of socialization. They do things. They create identities. And yeah, sometimes people become more serious offenders after they've gone to prison, specifically because they learn it and they're socialized by other people who are incarcerated. And as society industrializes, imprisonment becomes one of the most important forms of punishment and behavior, right? It didn't used to be that we put a large number of people in prison. This is a function of essentially late modernity. As we have no social means of punishing crime, we have to have institutional means. Why do we typically incarcerate people? Typically for 4 reasons. The first one, and the one that probably happens the least, actually, at least in theory, right, putting someone in a controlled environment could be an opportunity to rehabilitate them. And things like drug treatment or therapy are often offered in prisons to help people with whatever problems they have. And sometimes even things like education. And this goes back to the beginnings of kind of the prison system, say in Canada, especially if you look at youth criminal justice. One of the things that used to happen with young people that were delinquent is they would put them in what were called industrial schools, right? Where basically they would be put in these schools and taught a trade or made to work on some kind of assembly line with the idea that once they got out of prison, they could go and work in a factory because they would have the skills. So at least in theory, right, prisons can be or incarceration can be a space for rehabilitation. The other one is deterrence, right? You try to scare people from committing crimes by threatening them with prison, right? If you commit that, you're going to go to jail. I don't know, my mom was an elementary school teacher for years, and I remember a couple times they had kids that were particularly troublesome, and they would take them to the police station and have the police, just show them what a jail cell was, and they would close the door behind them and let them sit there for a little bit. One time I remember these kids had stolen their parents' credit cards and decided to run away from school together, and that's what the police did, right? The deterrent effect being like, it's scary to be in prison. It's a scary, scary, scary space. So it's a deterrent that you could go to prison. Revenge for illegal acts, right? So this, you sometimes hear this framed, I think more in American jurisprudence than you do in Canadian at this point, where people will say that you have to go and pay your debt to society, right? You're sent to prison because you have to pay your debt to society. That's essentially a way of articulating that prison is for revenge for illegal acts. That somehow your illegal, your criminal deviance has damaged society in some way, and that you have to make restitution for that by sitting in prison. To be fair, this one has never really made a whole lot of sense to me. I'm like, I don't see where the restitution comes from, but that you do hear that around. And the last one, incapacitation. If you are in prison, you cannot commit more crimes that affect the general public, right? So, often, especially with murderers, sex offenders, we tend to think of this as an important part of prison, right? While they are in prison, they can't continue to offend and they can't continue to harm society. So incarceration serves as a form of incapacitation. They can't negatively affect society any more than they have if they are in prison. Okay, do I have a question slide? No. As far as I know, it is not. It's only certain times. Is the midterm cumulative? I just said it's not. Shh. Okay. Okay, you know what? I'm going to say this. I'm going to put a big X through here. I'm going to talk about this because this always, I meant to take this slide out and I forgot. This always confuses people, and I've asked questions about it for many years. I'm just going to keep scribbling on it for a minute. This always confuses people, so let's not worry about this and this whole idea of moral panics. I meant to take this slide out and I forgot because I don't like it. And same here. All right, let's go to, I'm going to put a big X to this one as well. And only, if you are not in class today and you're not watching the video, then you won't know that I'm not going to talk about these two slides. Like I said, I meant to take them out, but I forgot. Okay, so capital punishment, right? So, when we talk about different forms of punishment, right, and the rationales for them, capital punishment is, generally thought of as a super form of deterrence, right? Especially for things like murder, right? That if you know that you might die, you will not commit that offense if you might face the death penalty. However, it works really well as a form of revenge. However, when we look at the statistics, one of the things we know is the kind of crimes that tend to get the death penalty as a sentence are things like murder. Now, as opposed to what you might have seen on television, right? And what we all see on television on shows like, I don't know, like NCIS or, the Law and Order series when it was still on, or, all of these crime shows, Blue Bloods and all of this stuff, most murders are super spontaneous, right? Most of the time when someone commits a murder, like, of course there's exceptions, but most murders are not planned. Most murders are, an abusive partner gets enraged and beats their partner to death. Or, two people get into a fight, and one person has a gun and shoots the other person. Most murder is not planned, right? It's very rare that murders are planned. Like I said, there's none of this like cool NCIS or CSI kind of stuff where, they froze a bullet they made a bullet of ice, so after it killed the person, it melted and destroyed the evidence, right? Like none of that stuff. And so it's not very good deterrent, because most of the time when people commit capital crimes, they're actually not thinking, right? They're not in a kind of mental state where they're actually thinking about what they're doing. They're actually in sort of heightened emotional state, and they're not thinking. So they're not like, well, if I kill my wife, I'll go to prison, so I guess I won't. I might get the death penalty because we're in Texas. So I guess I won't. I'll just leave her instead. They're all usually like in such a rage that they just kill the person without thinking, right? Again, it does happen. First-degree murders that are planned do happen, but they're rare, and usually the people who would commit, say, a first-degree murder are sociopaths or psychopaths, right? So they're not deterred by the idea of death in prison either. Okay, and this is my last slide for this section. Alternative strategies. Basically, increasingly, a lot of prison researchers and scholars on crime suggest that we need major reforms to our prison system, and largely to keep all but the most violent offenders out of prison. Because, what ends up happening when you put people in prison is they tend to re-offend, right? What the official kind of term is recidivism, right? So recidivism means, the chance of re-offending, and recidivism rates basically increase the more times people go to prison and the younger they go to prison. So when it comes to kind of criminal justice reforms, and we see this a lot in Canada's youth criminal justice system, lots of things like education, job training, individual and group therapy, substance abuse counseling, and behavior modification are all approaches we tend to take now as much as possible outside of prison to help people. We talk about, say, indigenous people. There's a whole bunch of practices now in Canada that aren't as prominent as they should be, but they're starting, of things like healing lodges and of restorative sentences, basically where people are reintegrated into their communities and are allowed to undo the harm they did through the commission of crime. And they've been relatively successful. And generally, kind of modern approaches to incarceration stress that we should reduce the number of people who are incarcerated, because the more you incarcerate people, the more likely they are to end up as career criminals. Okay. What's my thoughts on the death penalty by firing squad being reinstated in Idaho? I was not aware that the death penalty by firing squad had been reinstated in Idaho. I mean, it's in a sense, okay, I'll say this. The death penalty in whatever form it is incredibly barbaric, right? Whether it's done by lethal injection or by hanging or whatever, by firing squad, it's an incredibly barbaric practice to take someone else's life in this way. And I think one of the ways that, like, say, lethal injection changed things is it made it seem more sanitary, right? It made it seem nice and clean and chemical and medical, which made it seem acceptable to a lot of people, but it's still an incredibly egregious thing. By firing squad, at least you actually acknowledge the inherent violence of the act. And, if you're gonna show it on TV or something, you would show someone getting shot by a firing squad and make people sort of have to deal with the inherent violence of the death penalty, which I think is a good thing, because I think we've sanitized it a little bit too. Not in Canada, we banned it, but in the US, they've sanitized it to a great degree. So, I'm all for death by firing squad if it makes people see the actual violence of the act. Okay, am I done? Yes, that's it. Okay, I'm not done with you for today, though. We're gonna start another unit. So we had just enough time to do one more unit before the exam. So I'm going to pull up, and you can't see because my screen went black again. Got enough time to sneak in globalization. So we're going to do this, and we should be able to finish it up next time. Give me half a second here. There we go. Okay. I'm gonna send you out on a Friday with something pretty easy. Okay. Alrighty. Globalization. That's the Slido. I'll be really quick, because what we're actually going to do is we're going to watch a short video. It's about 14 minutes, little short documentary, which I think illustrates globalization really nicely. So I'm letting you, we'll hopefully take it easy for a Friday. All right.
Rolling. I'm Alex Bloomberg at Planet Money, and a while ago we had this idea. Make a t-shirt, and then follow that shirt around the world as it gets made. This, right here, crap. This is the shirt we made. And it's just an ordinary shirt. It's not made of organic cotton. It's not handmade in the United States. We wanted to tell the story of our clothes the way the vast majority of our clothes are actually made. Because behind all of our clothes, behind this shirt, there is an entire world. And once you see that world, you realize there's nothing ordinary about a simple t-shirt. Our t-shirts started here, or near here anyway, on a cotton farm in the Mississippi Delta. America, it turns out, exports more cotton than any other country in the world. For about a century, America maintained its cotton dominance by using slave labor. Today, it does so using technology.
This is a John Deere app, and it shows where the pickers and tractors are. We can go into the screen on a picker and see what the picker driver is actually seeing on his screen.
Sure, it's picking the cotton off the snow.
So we're driving south?
Yeah.
Bowen Flowers is a third-generation Mississippi cotton farmer. Even the seeds he uses are a feat of engineering to rival the iPhone. Most American cotton seeds are made in a lab, like this one and the Monsanto Corporation. Genes from bacteria are added to the cotton to make it more pest-resistant and tolerant of herbicides. There's a debate over the safety of genetically modified crops. For American cotton farmers, though, it's mainly been settled. 20 years ago, there was no GM cotton. Today, over 90% of American cotton is genetically modified. And all this technology, the machines that automatically bale the cotton, the specially designed trucks to haul those bales away, the high-speed gins that remove those lab-designed seeds, all this technology has an impact. Since the 1950s, cotton yields have almost tripled.
You've been harvesting all this cotton. How many t-shirts did you make?
Oh gosh, it's no telling. Do y'all happen to know that answer, how many it is?
We didn't know, but we went back and looked it up. The answer? From just this one farm, in just 1 year, there's enough cotton for 9 million t-shirts. That's a t-shirt for every single person in New York City. Our cotton leaves the United States and goes around the world to Colombia, Indonesia, and Bangladesh, where it goes from plant to fabric, with barely a human being involved. Just lots and lots of cool machines, which we set to music. Our cotton first went to spinning factories like this one. Raw cotton is sucked up, laid down in big sheets, straightened, pulled into long feathery ropes like an infinite ponytail, stretched, twisted, and with a final twist, it becomes yarn. It's then sent on big spools to the next step, the circular knitting machine, where our yarn is turned into fabric. It's washed, dyed, and voila, the fabric for our shirts. Soft, comfy, and a high-tech engineering marvel. Our men's t-shirt was made here, in this factory, in Bangladesh. Here's one of the people who made it.
এরপরে মিলানোর পরে সোল্ডার করবে আবার লগে এখানে টপ স্টিচ হবে একটা
Our women's t-shirt was made here, in this factory, in Colombia.
Ahí comienzo para conseguirla. La punta es lo más importante de la camiseta. Es lo que le da la apariencia a la camisa.
Doris and Jasmine share a job, but they're separated by the economic realities of the countries they live in. Bangladesh is much poorer than Colombia. And the role the garment industry plays in Bangladesh, the role of our t-shirts, is very different. Jasmine Akhtar lives with her brother, sister-in-law, and roommate in a tiny rooming house. There's no running water, just a gas stove to cook. There's a small TV and a bookcase that holds all her belongings. She leaves for work at 7 a.m. each day, 6 days a week. She makes one of the lowest wages in the world, about $80 a month. Jasmine has been working in clothing factories since she was 16 years old. And she is not alone. 4 million people in Bangladesh work in the garment industry. That's double the number from a decade ago. Which raises a question. What has driven 4 million people to work long hours in these factories for some of the lowest wages in the world? To answer that question, we went back with Jasmine to the village where she grew up.
কেউ ভালো সুস্থভাবে চলা অবস্থায় কেউ কখনো গার্মেন্টসে যাবে না কারণ আমি যেরকম আসছি এরকম সবাই
A lot of garment workers come from villages like Jasmine's, where people worry about getting enough food to eat and sometimes don't, and where girls are seen as an economic burden. The solution? Find a husband with the means to support your daughter. But finding a good husband costs money, a dowry. In Jasmine's family, her older sister's dowry sent the family into debt.
আমাদের থেকে ঋণ পাবে প্রতিদিন ঘরে আসবে একটা লোক তখন আমার ভিতরে একটা জিদ আসছে যে কি রে আমরা তো ঘরে আছি বেকার আমরা কেন থাকবো আমরা শহরে গেলে তো অনেক টাকা ইনকাম করতে পারবো তখন আমার জিদে আমি শহরে গেছি যাওয়ার পরে আমি চাকরি করে মা বাবাকে টাকা দিছি হেল্প করছি আর কি যাই আস্তে আস্তে সব ক্লিয়ার হয়ে গেছে
This was Jasmine's trade-off. Long hours, a monotonous low-wage job. But in a factory, she says, that feels safe, better than others she's worked in. An improvement, however slight, over a life of even more crushing poverty in her village. In the middle of our t-shirt project, the worst garment industry disaster in history happened in Bangladesh. The factory collapse at Rana Plaza. Suddenly, the world was considering questions that we'd been considering. Who are the people that make our clothes? What are their lives like? More than 1,000 people died that day. They died seeking the same things that Jasmine was seeking. A few more calories in their diet, the chance maybe to pay off a debt. They died, in other words, trying to make the same trade-off that Jasmine had, a life of extreme poverty for one slightly better off. Our women's t-shirt was made in a country with a much more advanced economy, Colombia, Things there are different. Doris Restrepo lives there with her mother in a small apartment. And she supports the two of them on the salary she earns at the factory where our shirts were made.
Me imagino que las personas que van a usar esa camiseta son personas de Estados Unidos, gringos, gordos. Me imagino a las personas gordas porque las camisetas que hacemos, así como inmensas, y ahí sabemos que es para personas gigantes.
Doris makes almost 4 times what Jasmine makes in Bangladesh and can imagine a life outside the garment industry. Doris has a small side business selling pastries door to door and dreams of one day opening her own business.
Pienso que si Dios quiere y todo me sale bien para este año, es el último en mi profesión.
In Colombia, the garment industry is just an industry. But in Bangladesh, it's a social upheaval. Millions of women like Jasmine living lives that just 20 years ago would have been hard to imagine. Lives filled with new risks and new possibilities. Most of the money Jasmine earns at the factory, she sends home to her family. But she keeps about $10 a month for herself, for food, or maybe an impulse purchase on her one day off a week. We talked to both labor activists and factory owners about the impact of our t-shirt on the lives of people in Bangladesh. Is our shirt providing opportunities for people like Jasmine, or is it taking advantage of a desperate population? Both the activists and the owners told us the same thing, that the worst possible outcome from tragedies like the factory collapse at Rana Plaza would be for the garment industry to leave Bangladesh altogether. What they don't agree on, what they're fighting about right now, what more needs to be done to improve the lives of workers in Bangladesh? And what does it all have to do with the price of our t-shirt? Our t-shirts got from the factories in Colombia and Bangladesh back home to us in this, a shipping container. This one right there, that's ours. And containers are the unsung innovation that makes the global economy possible. Containers came on the scene in the 1960s, and they made shipping, which used to be a huge pain in the ass, much more efficient. The container is loaded onto our ship, captained by this guy. The ship leaves Colombia. A week later, it arrives in Miami. Our container with our shirts inside then gets loaded back onto a truck, and then onto a train, where it makes its way north. And this whole journey, thousands of miles, ships, trains, and trucks, cost just pennies per shirt. A tiny fraction of the cost of the raw materials in our shirt. Far less than the cost to print the design on our shirt. And a drop in the bucket compared to what it costs our shirts to take the final leg of their journey, from our warehouse to you. So here's to you, shipping container, the humble hero of the global economy.
¿Y qué le crees que le gustaría, o qué te gustaría a ti, que esa gente que está comprando esta camiseta, que sepa de ti? ¿Qué te gustaría que ellos...
¿Qué hay detrás de esta camiseta? Sí, un mundo.
বেশিরভাগ স্বপ্নে দেখি যে বড় বড় নদী পার হয়ে যায় আমি মাঝখানে যায় নৌকা অথবা ডিঙ্গি যেটা ডুবে যায় আমি এটার মধ্যে থেকে সাঁতার কাটে নদীটা পার হয়ে যায়
una persona con sueños, con esperanzas, que quiere salir adelante. Personas con muchas necesidades, humildes, también con muchos sueños.
Okay. Okay, so I got 9 minutes left. All right, so globalization probably one of the biggest transformations in human history. Probably starts around 1980. And it's created what one Canadian scholar named Marshall McLuhan coined a global village, right? That the world fundamentally has shrunk, right? It is much smaller than it was in the past, owing to things like the internet, right? We're all connected through the internet, or many billions of people connected through the internet. Easier travel, right? It's so much easier to travel today, especially if you have a Canadian or American passport. You can get into a lot of places with no visa. Money moves easily across the world, right? It's so easy to move funds from one place to another, right? Go and you take a flight to London or Beijing or Delhi, and you get there, you can get local currency out of the ATMs there with your bank card from your bank in Canada. Kind of the big way of doing business that we have in North America, mega stores like Walmart, mega grocery stores are increasingly becoming the norm across the world as well. Apparently Costco opened up a location in China and it's massively successful. For no particular reason. I've heard that Chick-fil-A is opening a store or a couple stores in Edmonton, and I'm very excited because I really, really like Chick-fil-A's chicken sandwiches. Increased use of English, right? English has become, in a sense, the lingua franca of the world, and today there are more non-native English speakers than there are native English speakers on Earth. So there's more people who learned English as a second language than people who learned it as their primary language. And it has allowed people all over the world to speak to each other in a kind of common language. Okay, so globalization, it has, some potential goods and some potential bads. So, amongst other things, right, people have become increasingly aware and dependent on one another. The global economy is deeply intertwined, right? That's why when Russia invaded Ukraine, the prices of all sorts of things went bananas. Except for bananas, actually, because neither country was a provider of bananas. But things like grain, microchips, steel, oil, and natural gas, all of these things, the prices kind of went a little insane because all of these economies are now deeply interdependent and connected to each other. So, someone gets a butterfly flaps its wings in Beijing, the price of oil goes up in Edmonton. It's now increasingly easy to move, capital, commodities, culture, and people across national boundaries, but it's also creating a bunch of problems, right? We see the immigration crisis going on in the US, where people are traveling to get to the United States, principally for economic opportunities, and it's creating social upheaval. We've seen that in Europe too, people coming across the Mediterranean and from the Middle East and North Africa into Europe, creating a lot of social dislocation. Goods, it's generally a nice thing that, it's easy to get goods across the world. It's also, for instance, allowed things like the Russians to skirt sanctions and continue building weapons with Western components, even though, a bunch of limitations have tried to be put on there. Globalization has made it really, really hard to stop the flow of goods, right? The Russians can create a shell company in Turkey and use that company to buy microchips from Taiwan and then ship them back into Russia and make missiles. So it's really good. It's also a really complicated thing. In some senses, rather than spreading wealth, globalized industries, in some cases, are actually turning the world into a more unequal place. The rich have gotten much, much richer. The top 1% of the kind of global wealth distribution has gotten much richer in the past, basically 40 years, or 45 years roughly. And the poor have only gotten a little bit richer. But the question is always, is inequality actually always bad? Because, well, say there's a lot of inequality in a place like China. Globalization has also essentially eliminated extreme poverty in China. Last year, the Chinese government declared that extreme poverty had been eradicated from China completely, mostly on the back of globalization. And globalization is sometimes seen as hurting local cultures. And of course, the natural environment, right? So the expansion of industry all over the world definitely causes a lot of environmental problems. And sometimes global companies will go make things in places with looser environmental regulations. Places like Bangladesh, places like India, places like China, and increasingly sub-Saharan Africa are all attractive for multinational corporations because they can get away with a lot of stuff in those places. They don't have to, follow labor rights or environmental laws, so it can damage the natural environment. And there's been instances, say in India, where Coca-Cola built a factory, tapped the aquifer, sucked an aquifer that the people in villages were using wells required to, live, and used it to make bubbly brown sugar water that tastes really good, but also, it's not terribly good for you or the environment in lots of ways. So some of this process, and it might hurt local cultures, specifically, around food and around entertainment. It's tough to compete with Hollywood. It's tough to compete with the global music industry because they're so powerful. They make most of their money back in the United States and Canada, and then they can sell products in, say, Africa, Asia, and other places very cheap, which means it can be really hard for, say, local filmmakers or local musicians to compete. And this is sometimes called, cultural imperialism. The United States in particular is imperializing the world with its culture, spreading American culture and potentially values all over the world. Sometimes also called McDonaldization. My favorite one is Coca-colonization. I really like that term. And yeah, anti-globalization activists, basically view globalization as the next form of imperialism, one that specifically eschews occupation, but still has a lot of military and political control behind it. All right, I'm going to do this one last slide, and then I'm going to let you go. I can do this in 2 minutes. Okay, our actions have implications for people far away. That's that Whole Planet Money video, and what was being discussed there, in the making of the t-shirt is a global commodity chain, and almost everything you own is part of a global commodity chain. Your shoes, right, the leather comes from one place, the metal comes from another. It's put together in one place or maybe 3 places. Okay. So yeah, when you tap in, you're seeing the whole world. That one t-shirt that they're talking about has been around the world and shipped around. All right, so this is facilitated by technology. Technology has made it possible to move goods and services around the world, and it's not always super high tech. Sometimes it's jets and shipping containers. Politics, right? Basically, there's been a big political push since the 1980s on more and more global integration and bringing people into the globalized economy and economics, right? Capitalism and all these mega corporations are always looking for new markets and ways of saving money on cheaper labor, worse environmental legislation, and increasing their profits, not always to your or my benefit. Okay, that's all I can do. I feel like I did pretty good. All right, we will see you all on Monday. We'll blast through globalization, Wednesday review, Friday exam. It'll be great. Hi there. What's that? Yeah, I don't know why that's there. It was there when I walked in. I'm just too lazy to erase it. Should turn the mic on. Somebody need money. I guess so. Oh, yeah. Everybody needs money.